Hello and welcome to video number 7 in this series taking a look at the greatest players of the Premier League era, in each position, brought to you by HITC Sevens. So there is some tremendous symmetry there. If you are new to this series, and indeed the channel, we have already taken a look at the Premier League's greatest ever goalkeepers, right backs, centre backs, left backs, defensive midfielders, and attacking midfielders, so feel free to go back and watch those videos after this one, should you wish. But that means that today is the turn of the right wingers. Now, when I say right wingers, just to be clear, I am not referring to Carl Henry, Frank Lampard, or Paolo Di Canio, but rather to players who played the majority of their football in the Premier League, either on the right side of midfield or on the right of a front three. It must be said, particularly in these forward positions, that most footballers have played in more than one position. Lots of wingers are capable of playing on both flanks, as a number 10, and even often as a centre forward. Every player who features in this 7, and the subsequent honourable mentions, made most of their Premier League appearances on the right-hand side of the pitch. So, if you're wondering why a certain player wasn't mentioned or didn't feature, say Gareth Bale or Raheem Sterling, that is because they have played more Premier League games on the left than they have on the right, and will therefore be in contention for next week's 7 rather than this one. As ever, the criteria is a simple one: quality and quantity of appearances in the Premier League. That is it. It is the Premier League's greatest wingers rather than the Premier League's best wingers. A couple of brilliant seasons is unlikely to cut the mustard, but nor are 500 deeply mediocre appearances over the course of more than a decade. By the same token, Cristiano Ronaldo's heroics at Real Madrid, Juventus or with Portugal have zero bearing on this 7. And indeed, nor do his performances in the FA Cup or in the Champions League whilst playing for Manchester United. Similarly, Aaron Lennon's accomplishments at Kayserispor in the 2020-21 season are also disregarded. Sorry, Aaron. Without further ado then, here are the 7 greatest right wingers, in my view, and my view only, of the Premier League era. 7th, Riyad Mahrez. I have been on a bit of a journey when it comes to Riyad Mahrez, from thinking that he was just playing out of his skin and on confidence in Leicester City's unlikely title-winning season, to realising that he is actually a pretty special player. I now find myself defending Mahrez from what I often consider to be fairly baseless criticisms since his £60 million move to Manchester City in 2018. The French-born Algerian international, who grew up in the suburbs of Paris, is often accused of being inconsistent. But that couldn't really be any further from the truth. In reality, Mahrez is among the most consistent and productive players in the Premier League. And he has been for some time. It is just the case that Pep Guardiola frequently rests and rotates him, giving that perception, I think, of inconsistency. That has negative implications for Mahrez in terms of a 7 such as this, since it means that his contribution has been limited in a way in which no other player in this 7s has. And that is one of the reasons why he only finishes 7th, despite being just as, if not even more gifted, than a few of the players ahead of him. Mahrez honed his skills on the streets of one of Paris's many banlieues. Always incredibly gifted, his slight build and general lack of physicality prevented him from joining a professional club until the age of 19, and he wouldn't make his professional debut until the age of 20. In January 2014, Mahrez joined Leicester City, helping the Foxes to win promotion from the Championship, Premier League survival, and then the Premier League title within the space of just 2.5 years. Very much a modern-day inverted winger, Mahrez tends to operate on the right despite being fairly one-footed in favour of his left. But his ability on the ball is such that few fullbacks are able to stop him from cutting inside and wreaking havoc. Undoubtedly, one of the finest wide players in world football, over the last, 6 or 7 years now, Mahrez has made 244 Premier League appearances in total, scoring 73 goals, making 50 assists, and he won both the PFA Fans and PFA Players Player of the Year awards in the 2015-16 season, as the most gifted member of Leicester's history-making and Premier League title-winning squad. 6th, Joe Cole. One of many players to feature in this series who is tough to nail down to a specific position, it is my opinion that Joe Cole should never have become a winger at all. and certainly not the type of traditional mid-2000s wide man that Jose Mourinho turned him into. A street footballer, a bit like Riyad Mahrez in that regard, Joe Cole was also pretty diminutive when he broke through, but on the ball, he was quite frightening. I would go as far as to suggest that, as a teenager, Cole was the most technically gifted player in this seven, and when you see some of the players who are to come, that is one hell of a claim. During his early years at West Ham, playing alongside the likes of Rio Ferdinand, Frank Lampard, Paolo Di Canio and Michael Carrick, Cole played essentially in a free role, afforded a great deal of freedom by manager Harry Redknapp. At that time, Cole looked like he could become the next Gaza, and I don't think that is being hyperbolic in the slightest. Had he been Spanish or Italian, I think there is a decent chance that he would have won a Ballon d'Or, or at least come close. But Cole still went on to have a magnificent career, even if he was misused, in my opinion. His 378 Premier League appearances were split fairly evenly between the right and left flanks and attacking midfield, but he played slightly more games on the right, hence why this is the 7 that he is designated to. A 3-time Premier League title winner, Cole made the PFA Team of the Year in the 2005-06 season, and he was Chelsea's Player of the Year for the 2007-08 campaign, seeing off competition from the likes of Frank Lampard and Didier Drogba. Inventive and explosive, Cole had a catalogue of tricks up his sleeve and was almost unplayable at his very best. Without persistent injury problems, which ended his Premier League career at the age of 33, I suspect he would have finished 4th. Had he maximised his true potential and avoided injuries, possibly 1st. 5th, Freddie Longberg. Fun fact, did you know that Freddie Longberg's first name is actually Carl? That's right, the Swede's full name is in fact Carl Fredrik Longberg. No one calls him Carl, though it was only in England that he picked up the nickname Freddie, and most people in Sweden still just call him Fredrik. None of that is relevant in the slightest to Longberg's ability on a football pitch or his accomplishments in the Premier League. Though, he might not have got quite as much modelling work as he did had he been known as Carl. My apologies to any Carls that might be watching this video, let it be known that that is a reflection only of the shallow-minded world of modelling and not a reflection of my own personal prejudices. Another fairly late developer, in terms of his size, Longberg took a little bit of time to really get going at Halmstad prior to his move to Arsenal. A number 10 at the time, Longberg also took a season to adapt to life in England, but once he got going, he became a real force on either flank. Sweden's answer to David Beckham, Longberg was a man of many hairstyles and even more talents. The majority of Longberg's appearances in the Premier League, all but 25 of which came at Arsenal, came on the right flank, with Robert Pires playing out on the left and Dennis Bergkamp tending to operate as a second striker. As cold as ice in front of goal, Longberg always seemed to be relaxed and undaunted by the size of any occasion. Perhaps that is why he developed such a useful knack of scoring at key moments in the biggest games. Admittedly, a number of those goals came in cup competitions and are therefore irrelevant to this 7. But it is telling that Manchester City, Manchester United and Tottenham are the 3 teams that he scored against most frequently. In total, Longberg played 241 Premier League games, scoring 48 goals and making 29 assists. He won the Premier League Player of the Season award in 2001-02 ahead of his teammate Thierry Henry, in addition to making the Premier League's 2002 Overseas Team of the Decade. 4th, Steve McManaman. When the first of the United Kingdom's COVID-19 related lockdowns hit, back in March 2020, ITV decided to broadcast Euro 96 in full. I was a toddler when Euro 96 took place, so much to my girlfriend's delight, I took the opportunity to watch quite a lot of games. That tournament and that summer are much featured in England, and I'm sure it was brilliant to experience if, unlike me, you were over the age of 1. However, I have to say, I was pretty taken aback by how poor England were. In the game against Scotland in particular, other than Gazza's famous goal, England were pretty diabolical, and I actually thought Scotland were the better team. The one exception to how underwhelming I found England in most of those lockdown Euro 96 games was Steve McManaman, who was routinely England's most dangerous and effective attacking outlet. My earliest memories of McManaman are of watching him at Real Madrid, but I must admit, it is a recurring theme whenever I rewatch Liverpool or England games or highlights from the mid to late 1990s that he leaves a big impression. McManaman actually played on the left wing for England at Euro 96, except for the quarter-final against Spain, where he swapped positions with Darren Anderton and played on the right, but it was on the right that he played most frequently, both for Real Madrid and, more importantly, in the Premier League. McManaman's preferred position was in attacking midfield, which he felt best utilised his vision, technique, and ability to run at players. But he hardly ever played there due to the position being relatively redundant at the time. One of the best dribblers of a ball that the English game has ever produced, McManaman was quick and could really cross a ball. He was sometimes criticised for not scoring enough goals, and he most likely would play in midfield rather than as one of three forwards were he playing today. But as an old school wide man, he was superb. McManaman played a grand total of 275 times in the Premier League, scoring 41 goals and making 59 assists. Had he spent his entire career playing in England, and had his tremendous breakout campaign not come before the Premier League's breakaway from the Football League, which meant that I could not count it as part of this 7, perhaps he would have finished even higher. But all things considered, 4th seems bang on in my mind. 3rd, David Beckham. A man who was back in the news a week or so ago after Piers Morgan went on a rant about him not being very good at football on Twitter. David Beckham is a man who tends not to be out of the news for long. Like most people my age, I grew up idolising Beckham and trying to replicate his free kicks at the park or in a friend's back garden. Now I think that he is a moral vacuum for accepting £150 million to put a respectable veneer on a World Cup built by slave labourers, an amount of money which equates to at least £23,000 for every migrant worker who has died in Qatar since the country won its greatly contested World Cup bid. As much as I think that doing that when you've already got more wealth than some countries is pretty despicable, I cannot deny that Beckham was a sensational footballer. It is sometimes said that Beckham's celebrity was greater than his actual talent, and that his talents have been greatly exaggerated due to his fame. There may be one or two people with zero interest in football who, when asked to name footballers, can only come up with Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, and David Beckham. And certainly, that would be very generous company for Beckham to keep. But among those who are interested in football, I actually think that the opposite is true. Beckham is talked about so much in terms of his off-pitch activities that his talents on it often seem to me to be diminished, if not outright dismissed. That is an injustice, since Beckham was a fantastic footballer who had an enormous appetite for the sport. His ability from set pieces, which were among the finest in the entire history of the sport, did not come about by accident, but through hours of practice on the training ground. The same is true of his stamina, fitness, and range of passing from open play. Becks was never a brilliant dribbler of the ball, nor was he the quickest, but his vision and movement were outstanding. Hence why he later transitioned to play in central midfield. Beckham left the English game in the summer of 2003, having just turned 28, never to return, but he still managed to play 265 Premier League games, scoring 62 goals and making 80 assists. A Ballon d'Or runner-up in 1999, Beckham made the PFA Team of the Year in 4 successive seasons, and his spot in 3rd was never in too much doubt. 2nd, Cristiano Ronaldo. This will make me very unpopular, of that I am sure, but I don't care. Maybe that is being a little bit flippant. What I mean is that it would be very easy for me to make this entire series and make my selections based on how popular I think they will be, what will get the video the most likes, and the fewest disagreements down below in the comments. In fact, if you look at most lists ranking great players, that is exactly what they do. But life is too short for that, and I have laid out a very specific criteria, by which metric, undeniably I think, Cristiano Ronaldo is the 2nd greatest right winger of the Premier League era. Now, clearly, Ronaldo is the greatest player to have played in the Premier League. And by that I mean, there is no greater footballer who has graced English football since 1992. Not even Ian Ashby. But being the greatest player to have played in the Premier League is not the same thing as being the greatest player in the history of the Premier League. Thierry Henry, for example, is perhaps the greatest player to have played in the MLS, but he was outscored by Juan Pablo Angel, Kenny Cooper, Tim Cahill, and Bradley Wright Phillips during his time at New York Red Bulls. So, I wouldn't say that he was the greatest MLS player of all time. Cristiano Ronaldo was outstanding in the second half of his first stint at Manchester United, where he went from being a skinny wide man who was often accused of being a show pony to a Ballon d'Or winner who scored 42 goals in a single season. It is certainly arguable that Ronaldo's 2007-08 season is the single highest peak that we have seen in the Premier League, but I think it is also indisputable that Ronaldo became a much greater Real Madrid player than Manchester United player. It is also worth stating, of course, that Ronaldo is unlikely to be remembered as a right winger, but that is where he played the majority of his games in the Premier League. Now, back in English football's top flight, of course, at the time of recording, Ronaldo has made 216 Premier League appearances, scoring 92 goals and making 32 assists, and he won the Division's Player of the Season award in both the 2006-07 and 2007-08 campaigns. First, Mohamed Salah. Again, this is going to be deemed as very controversial in the comments, but it really shouldn't. Cristiano Ronaldo has achieved a higher peak, has had a greatly superior career, and has achieved far more within the game than Mohamed Salah. That much is, once again, indisputable. And even with Salah playing absolutely out of his skin at this moment in time, age 29, I would be willing to go out on a limb and say that will remain the case up until the point at which the Egyptian retires. In the Premier League, however, which is, the entire point of this series, the complexion is rather different. Both Ronaldo and Salah arrived in England as youngsters at very big clubs, but whilst Ronaldo would carve out a starting berth for himself before becoming the club's star man, Salah, like so many talented young Chelsea players, was pied out on loan and eventually sold. When he returned to England 3 years later, he would make Chelsea look a little bit stupid. In his first season back in England, Salah scored 32 goals in 36 Premier League games, which is more goals than Ronaldo ever scored during a season in the Premier League, and is the most that any player has scored, whilst the league has used a 38-game season format. The current campaign is only actually Salah's 5th season of regular first-team football in the Premier League, so it speaks volumes of his contribution to the English game that he takes top spot. During that time, he has made 180 Premier League appearances, which is around 36 or one whole season's worth of games fewer than Ronaldo, yet he has scored 113 goals and made 43 assists, which is already 32 goal contributions more than the Portuguese legend. Salah has just been relentlessly brilliant in the Premier League and is arguably playing his very best football at the time of this video's production. There is no doubt in my mind that, at least by my criteria, in terms of the quality and quantity of his performances in the Premier League, he is the greatest right winger of the Premier League era. That may be it for my 7, but I must give full credit to those who made my shortlist and just missed out. Manchester United duo Nani and Andrea Kanchelskis were among the closest of featuring, but with only 147 and 151 Premier League appearances apiece to their names, it was always likely to be an uphill battle. Ultimately, I think Riyad Mahrez is better and more consistent than both, and he has already played far more Premier League games at the very highest level. Darren Anderton can consider himself extremely unfortunate to miss out, as can Theo Walcott, I think, given that he was excellent at his best and has played an awful lot of Premier League games. Elsewhere, the most honourable of honourable mentions go to the likes of Sebastian Larsson, Damien Duff, Norberto Solano, Mark Albrighton, Aaron Lennon, Steve Stone, and Sean Wright-Phillips. Thank you all very much as ever for watching. Apologies if my voice was a bit off today. I may have shouted too much last night at Bramall Lane as Hull City played against Sheffield United, but hopefully you will forgive me for my sins. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, especially if there is any abuse for my selections. Always good to see those. And, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on to the finest channel on all of YouTube, which is, of course, HITC Sevens. You can also find me on Twitter and on Instagram via the username at HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.